NASA detected the asteroid 3 minutes before it hit Earth. Here's what happened. The asteroid was 17 meters wide, roughly the size of a 6-story building, and it was traveling at 19 kilometers per second when the automated detection system at the Catalina Sky Survey flagged it at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The system classified it as a potential impactor and routed the alert to NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office, where the night shift consisted of Dr. James Hadley and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. James looked at the trajectory calculation and felt his stomach drop through the floor. The object was not a potential impactor. It was a confirmed impactor. Estimated time to atmospheric entry, 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Estimated impact zone, a circle of probability centered on the mid-Atlantic, somewhere between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. Estimated yield, 500 kilotons, roughly 30 times the Hiroshima bomb. Not an extinction event, not even close, but enough to generate a tsunami that would reach the coasts of Europe, Africa, and the Eastern Americas within hours. James had 192 seconds to decide who to call first. James called FEMA first, then the Pentagon, then the White House Situation Room. Each call lasted less than 15 seconds because there was no time for questions, no time for verification, no time for the careful protocols that existed precisely for this scenario but assumed hours or days of warning, not minutes. He said the same thing to each. Asteroid impact, Atlantic Ocean, 3 minutes, tsunami warning, this is not a drill. The responses ranged from stunned silence to immediate action, and James did not have time to find out which because the phones at the Planetary Defense Office were now ringing simultaneously as the automated alert system propagated through military and civilian channels. Across the Atlantic, it was 4:47 in the morning. Lisbon was sleeping. London was sleeping. The Azores were sleeping. Cargo ships were crossing the impact zone carrying goods that would never reach port. Fishing boats were setting out from Portuguese villages for a morning catch that would not happen, and 17 meters of iron and stone, invisible to the naked eye, was screaming through the last 1,000 kilometers of space at a speed that would cross that distance in less than a minute. The sky had not yet started to glow. The asteroid entered the upper atmosphere at an angle of 43 degrees, and immediately began to compress the air in front of it into a superheated plasma sheath that glowed brighter than the sun. Cameras on the International Space Station captured the entry as a line of fire drawn across the dark face of the Atlantic, visible from orbit as a brilliant white streak that lasted 4 seconds before the object hit the water. The impact was not like an explosion. It was like the ocean being punched by God. A column of water and steam rose 12 kilometers into the atmosphere in under a second. The shockwave flattened the sea surface for 50 kilometers in every direction, creating a ring of displaced water that immediately began traveling outward at 800 kilometers per hour. The energy release was equivalent to 23 Hiroshima bombs, less than the initial estimate because the asteroid had lost mass during atmospheric entry, but more than enough to generate waves that would reach the Azores in 22 minutes, the Portuguese coast in 45, and the eastern seaboard of the United States in 4.5 hours. The tsunami reached the Azores at 12 minutes past midnight local time. The islands had received 9 minutes of warning, transmitted through the emergency broadcast system by operators who were themselves uncertain whether the alert was real. 9 minutes is not enough time to evacuate an island. It is barely enough time to understand what is happening. But it is enough time to move uphill, and the people of the Azores, who lived on volcanic islands and understood the ocean's capacity for violence, reacted with an instinct that saved thousands of lives. They ran for high ground. They grabbed children and elderly neighbors and they climbed. The first wave was 4 meters high when it hit the eastern shores, not the building-crushing monster of disaster movies, but a relentless surge of water that flooded coastal areas, to a depth that turned streets into rivers and lifted cars like toys. The second wave was larger. The third was the worst, 7 meters of churning ocean that reached a kilometer inland and did not retreat for 40 minutes. The harbors were destroyed. The fishing fleets were scattered across the islands like broken toys. But the hills were crowded with people who were alive because 9 minutes had been just barely, impossibly enough. By sunrise, the scale of the event was becoming clear. The Azores had taken the worst of it, with significant damage to coastal infrastructure and a death toll that would eventually reach 347, a number that was both tragic and miraculously small given the circumstances. The Portuguese mainland experienced flooding in low-lying coastal areas. The west coast of Africa saw elevated wave heights that damaged harbors and fishing communities. The eastern seaboard of the United States experienced a storm surge equivalent to a moderate hurricane, causing property damage but few casualties thanks to the 4-hour warning window. James Hadley sat in the Planetary Defense Office at 7 in the morning, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the accumulated adrenaline of the worst night of his life, and stared at the detection timeline. 3 minutes. The difference between a catastrophic surprise and a survivable disaster had been 3 minutes of warning. If the asteroid had approached from a slightly different angle, if the survey telescope had been pointed at a different patch of sky, if the automated system had been one cycle slower in its analysis, the first warning would have been the flash of impact itself. 3 minutes had saved thousands of lives. And 3 minutes was, James knew with the quiet certainty of a man who had just watched his worst professional nightmare come true, not nearly enough. The next one might give them no warning at all.